In a few weeks, in a few weeks we're going to have Rosh Hashanah, so I think we need some preparation for it. I'm not sure what's going to be available to everybody in your shuls and with your whatever learning you do, whoever speaks. So I'm going to take you through. I was struggling with whether or not to do this year with everybody. Let me just give you the background to it. In 1975, which was Lamed Vav, because it was the second night of Rosh Hashanah, so already it was Lamed Vav, but it was in the English dating system, it's 1975. The Rebbe used to farbring second day Rosh Hashanah in the afternoon, and in this farbringen, the Rebbe dealt with some stuff which we've skirted around, and but I warn you, it is very, very deep, and the words everybody will understand, but putting this into real practice is very difficult, and you need many hours in the spiritual gym. But before we do that, I need to give you some background, although I'm sure everybody hears this every year, some of it every year. But let's start with this, that in all the Yom Tovim in the Torah, we celebrate an event, Pesach, Yetzias Mitzrayim, and Sukkot, etc. Every one of the holidays, we're celebrating an event. That's not true with Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah doesn't celebrate an event, other than it says that it's the beginning of Hashem's works, Maasecha, your creations. And the first question that is asked is, and we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, as you know, on the 1st of Tishrei, first of the month of Tishrei. We are now in the month of Elul, as we learned last week in the Shir, for those who were here or those who were plugged into the machine. And and you don't have to be a genius mathematician to understand that if we celebrate Rosh Hashanah on the 1st of Tishrei, and we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, let me tell you, there's another piece to that. We celebrate Rosh Hashanah on the day that Adam Rishon and his wife were created. And we say that Rosh Hashanah is a celebration of creation, and the ultimate creation is humanity. And since the ultimate creation is humanity, to celebrate, even though we don't celebrate it as an event, to the reality of humanity, we celebrate on the 1st of Tishrei. But there's a problem, because we know that Adam Rishon and his wife Hava were created on the 6th day of creation. Erev Shabbos, they were created. So really, creation began on 6 days earlier, which is the 25th of Elul. If it was the 25th of Elul, first of all, why do we celebrate on the 1st of Tishrei, 6 days later? Answer, because it's humanity. We'll come back to that. And secondly, why don't we celebrate anything on the 25th of Elul, when Hashem began to create the world? Answer, because all of that is preparation for humanity. Now, one of the things that a Jew who learns Hasidus, you have to know that we live at two levels. I can't stress this enough. We do this over and over again, week after week after week. We Jews live a life of gashmis, of physicality. We have to eat, we have to drink, we have to be married, we bring up children, we put out the garbage, we have to struggle with the mortgage, we have to deal with money, deal with crooks, thieves, that's everyday life. Everybody knows that. You forget that there's the marathon, and you're driving, and suddenly you find that you're in the traffic jam that's going to last 3 hours. That's part of our life. It's physical life. But at the same time, and this is the difference between man and animals, that an animal walks looking at the ground, walks on all fours looking at the ground, and humanity walks upright, and although his feet are on the ground, and although he looks at the ground, he also can look into the heavens. And what part of our life, part of our consciousness, part of our reality as Jews is a spiritual level. Now, everybody has that to a different level automatically by birth. It's definitely something that can be cultivated, as when you learn Torah, that's what happens. But to say that you can be a Jew and have no spiritual consciousness doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. And those people who deny that they have it, I promise you, when the plane's going down, they say Shema. Every Jews have this separate consciousness, and you have to be aware of that. Now, when we keep Rosh Hashanah as the beginning of the year, meaning it's the beginning of creation, why we are celebrating humanity as the beginning of creation is because the whole of the 6 days of what's called Sheshis Yemei Bereshis, the 6 days of creation, are building a preparation for the main game. The main game is us, is humanity in general, Jews in particular, and we'll see in a minute that job, that we are created for a purpose. And one of the things that we keep learning, because this is something that Rebbeim just stressed in nearly every Fabring, in nearly every Maimah, is that for a Jew to be fulfilled and to get to his purpose in life, it has to be through understanding this interplay between physical life with spiritual accents. And we know that this interplay is the interplay that we learn on Shavuos, that the physical has to be elevated into the spiritual, and the spiritual has to be brought down into the physical. And humanity is the only creature in existence that can do that job. Gentiles in general, Jews in particular. And our job is that job. And you can live not only one lifetime, you can live generations in families where this is ignored. You can have Gentiles who live and die 80, 90, 120 years, and they have no idea why they were born, they have no idea why they live, and they have no idea what's happening when they die. All they are doing is trying to emulate animals as much as possible, to gratify themselves with as much pleasure as possible and avoid as much pain as possible. Nothing wrong with it. That's a nefesh habahamis, that's an animal soul. We get it. But you need to get in just as clear relief that the main game for a Jew is that has to be recognized as a secondary part of one's life. The primary part of one's life is the few minutes a day that you spend on your spiritual life, on your davening, on talking to your God, kissing your mezuzah as you leave the house, the way a kid kisses his mummy or daddy when they're dropped off to school, talking to your God. Everybody does it. You're in trouble, you got a difficulty, you have a private dialogue with your God. In what language, in what form, in what state, who cares? And Jews have, and you know, unfortunately, people's egos get very much involved in this, and Jews, there are those Jews that have this sort of yarmulke and those Jews that have that sort of yarmulke, and you have a beard, you don't have a beard, you wear only black, you wear colors, and at the end of the day, it's not my place to paskin on anybody else, but at the end of the day, you have to understand that's not what Judaism is and what being a Jew is. Judaism is not a religion. It is a personal dialogue that every individual Jew has with his God. And if that dialogue includes learning the Torah and doing mitzvahs, he's going to have a different quality of life altogether. And if he doesn't do that yet, then hopefully he will, because it's a tragedy if he spends his life and misses out on that purpose. So that's why we celebrate Rosh Hashanah as the beginning of Hashem's works, because it's the beginning of humanity, which means it's the beginning of Hashem's genius creation of making something that's physical with a neshama, of course, which is able to add a dimension to the world. The world is physical, and we add the spiritual dimension to the world. That's what it means when we learn that we are partners with Hashem in creation. That's what it means. Because when a Jew does something which changes physicality, either by bringing spirituality into it or by elevating the physicality into spirituality, we are creating a further dimension to life. So we're partners in creation. And that's why we celebrate Rosh Hashanah. Now, there are so many offshoots to this fundamental principle that before we get to the really heavy stuff, which the river has no mercy with the level of heavy, you'll see in a minute. But before we get to that, I just need to explain a couple of other things. When Hashem created the world in the 6 days of creation, as you know, we use the metaphor, using our language to understand this infinite spirituality, which is impossible, but we say that Hashem spoke. He spoke the world into being. Vayomer Hashem yehi oya. Hashem said, let there be light. Vayehi oya. And there was light. That code of him speaking means that it's got various levels to it. It's communicative. It is a energy. Speech is an energy, and it is, but it's chitzonis. It's a level of superficiality. When you and I speak, we speak to communicate with somebody else. We don't speak for ourselves because we don't need speech for ourselves. When we think, we don't need speech. Thinking is deeper than speaking. So the code for the whole creative process is that Hashem spoke the world into being, and that's what that's part of Shem Elokim. We haven't got time to do that tonight, but so the question is, why does God need Am Yisrael to add a further dimension to his creation. He doesn't need anything. Hashem doesn't need anything. What does he need us for? So the answer to that we learn is that Hashem chose to empower his creation to add to creation. And that is a mind-bending reality. And, the tragedy is that most Jews haven't learnt this. They don't know it. They kind of feel it. It's very interesting. If you're honest with yourself, this is not a thing that you can discuss with other people. If you're honest with yourself, you kind of know about that, even though it hasn't been put into words for you, even though a Jew feels that. And if it's not realized, you do feel as though you're bumping into doors. You're not really sure what the doors are or how to go about it, but Jews do feel this. Now, it says that Hashem gets a pleasure, tainug, pleasure out of the fact that Am Yisrael in general, in particular, and humanity in general, is in this dynamic with him together. And it's a very difficult game because Hashem structured it in such a way that you can't see him, you can't feel him, you can't hear him, you can't access him with any of our senses. And yet, all Jews, at one level or another, have an absolute certainty that he's there. Absolute certainty. So, what is now this energy that Hashem makes by speaking, which is what gives him pleasure with Am Yisrael, etc. This process, we learn, is only good for 1 year. When Hashem created the world in the 6 days, it was infused with enough creative energy to last 1 year. On the last night of the year, that creative energy is withdrawn, and it's replaced with a new creative energy. Now, every year we learn that there is a subtly different light available to the world. And that subtly different light, you know about it because we're not 20 anymore. So when you think back over your life, you know that 1960 feels different to 2025. And it's many, many things. It's not just that the technology is better or different, but it is that as well. But life is subtly different every year, and the process of that subtle difference is generated by the blowing of shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Blowing, the mitzvah of the day for Rosh Hashanah is blowing shofar. What does it mean, blowing shofar? It is an alert. What did Adam Rishon do the first day that he was created? He called all the animals, all these midrashim are baby language. He called all the animals together and got them to worship the one God, to appoint the one God as king. That's code for the fact that we have to dominate all of Gashmias, all of creation, and make it subservient to Hashem. Not only at a subconscious level, but at a conscious level. So, and that's done in a code with the shofar. I haven't really got time tonight to go into that, but maybe next week or the week after we'll do some stuff on the shofar. But there are some properties to the shofar, that it's a cry and it comes from an animal's horn, and a whole lot of reasons why the shofar does what it does. But it is the signal on the new year to say Otomarishan, what Otomarishan did on the first day of creation is now being repeated again. And when it's in the first year, let me tell you, we learned an amazing thing, that Hashem created the first year with Hesed. No one deserved anything. It was all a gift. It was a present. When Otomarishan called in baby languages, called all the animals to bow down to Hashem and accept him as king, that means that he marshaled that activity in that first year. Now, depending on how successful he is, depends on what the energy is going to be in the next year. So we, Am Yisrael, by our behavior, influence the Hashgacha Pratis of the next year, which is formed up on that first day of the next year and introduced by the blowing of our shofar. So this is a heavy day. When it says it's the day of judgment, it's really a tiny, tiny description of the term that we're talking about. What does it mean, judgment? It means that depending on how Am Yisrael behave in that year, depending on the Torah they learn, depending on the mitzvahs that they do, depending on the kindness that they express, depending on the positivity that they do, is the subtly different new light for the new year. We get the year we make. We are the architects of that Hashgacha Pratis. And there's a book, I've quoted this before, I might have lent this to you, Vic, once, A Portrait of the People, I think it was called. There was a book, and in that, I think it was that book, it might have been another one, but whoever it was went through history showing that when Am Yisrael had Actus, when we were together, when we weren't fighting and bickering and then life on the planet was better for the Gentiles as well as for us. When we don't behave, when we bicker, and you can take any community, you can take a shul. If the shul is bickering and divided, the people are not doing as well. One of the things that you can see with shluchim, and God forbid, don't want to criticize any shliach. I believe that they're saints, most of them, and I mean they leave their comfort zone. They go and live in a wilderness where their children don't even get to see another kid that keeps Shabbos, and they have no kosher food. They have no mikveh. They start and they have no money, and they build a life and they build a Jewish environment around them, so that they're wonderful. But when they fight between themselves, communities get smashed immediately. And you can see, I don't want to, God forbid, point the bone at anybody, but if you know what happens in some communities around the world, it's directly traceable to the fact that the shluchim don't get on, or they're fighting about, and anyway, this isn't the time to be discussing Ahavas Yisrael and fighting, but the reality is that the way we live influences the blowing of the shofar, which influences the new light for the new year. Now that's all background, l'chaim. Not what this year is really about. So, to get you to understand what this year is really about, I want to take you through what the Rebbe goes through a process. And the process begins with the Haftorah that we read on Rosh Hashanah. Now, on Rosh Hashanah we read a Haftorah which is about a woman called Hannah. The story goes that there was a Yid, Elkanah, and he had two wives, Penina and Hannah. Penina was fertile and had lots of children. Hannah had no children. She was barren. And I'll do this quickly. It's in Malachim, first volume of Malachim of Kings, and it's the story of the birth of Shmuel Hanavi, who was Shmuel the prophet. And the story goes very quickly that Hannah comes to the Beis Hamikdash to daven for a child. And she's davening with great bitterness and great anguish. As to use the Hebrew, as she poured out her soul to her God. And Eli, who was the Kohen Gadol, and you have to understand what that means. He was a Rebbe of great capacity. He sees her and he says to her, "How long are you going to be a shikha? What? How dare you come in here drunk?" You know what happened to Nodov and Avihu when they came into the Beis Hamikdash? First of all, you should know, al pi halacha, it's forbidden to daven when you're drunk. Right? You're not allowed to daven when you're drunk. So, how is she davening when she's drunk? And it's a disgrace. And she says to him, she very respectfully, "My master," whatever the language is, "I'm not drunk. I'm pouring my soul out to my God for the birth of a child, and I'm doing a deal with God, if you want to know. The terms of the deal are as follows. You give me a child, and I promise you that that child will spend every waking and sleeping moment of his life serving you. You give me a child, and I'm going to bring him up to be your representative on earth. I'm going to bring him up to be the greatest prophet that ever lived since Moshe Rabbeinu." And Eli the Kohen Gadol is silenced. He doesn't continue telling her that she's drunk. He doesn't ask for it. He doesn't apologize. And he doesn't ask for, he doesn't repeat himself. He accepts her answer. And the Rebbe asks this enormous, and in this Farbrengen, the Rebbe analyzes this story up and down and backwards and forwards and left and right. And we can't do that tonight. It'll take too long, and I'm not clever enough to remember it all anyway. But I'm going to go through certain fundamental pieces to this story, because they're fundamental pieces about you and me. They're fundamental pieces about our relationship with our God, our private relationship with our God, which has got nothing to do with anybody else, by the way. You should know that although we daven with a minyan, for example, we daven with a minyan because we believe that if Jews have achdus, as I've explained, if we are together, if there is a unity, then Hashem listens to our prayers better. The volume's higher. But that doesn't mean that you have to daven with a minyan. If you can, it's better, because your prayers are heard more easily. But in that minyan, it's very important that there's some level of actus. If that's a minyan where this guy hates this guy and this guy's got a problem with this guy, and you know what he did to me 10 years ago, and I still haven't forgotten, I haven't forgotten, and then the davening is affected. Make no mistake about it. The davening is affected. So I'll give you an example of this. You know, we have Birkas Kohanim. Everyone knows what that is. The Kohanim go up the front and they bless the congregation. Do you know that if in Birkas Kohanim there is a Kohen who's having a fight with someone in the Olam, or doesn't like somebody in the Olam, he's not allowed to daven from. He's not allowed to daven in Birkas Kohanim. He's got to leave the room. He's got to leave the room. And if he doesn't, he imperils his own life, his health. So this actus is no joke. It's a very important part of it. But at the end of the day, the dynamic of what was happening in this story is between Hannah and her God. And we have most of the halachas on davening in Shulchan Aruch come from Hannah's davening, a woman's davening, by the way, not a man's. So when people tell you that we're male chauvinistic religion, they don't know the first thing about it. Women are held to be on a higher spiritual plane than men. So, what is it that first of all, we have a huge question. How is it possible that Eli short for Elyon, means godly? How is it that Eli, a Rebbe, a Kohen Gadol, mistakens a Jewish woman who is in such distress that she's crying her heart out to God for a child, and he thinks she's drunk? How's that possible? It makes no sense. So the first thing the Rebbe explains is it makes no sense because it isn't true. He didn't think she was drunk with alcohol. What did he think she was drunk with, and what did he disapprove of? He disapproved of the fact that she saw her needs as paramount. I'm going to explain that in a second. Just suspend disbelief and hold on to that explanation for a moment. He thought that she was prioritizing her needs. Now, what that means, let's understand what we're talking about here. We all have a nefesh habahamis. We all have an animal soul. And we all have our needs. And we all want our needs provided for. And we're entitled to daven for that. On the other hand, I'll tell you something from Hayoim Yoim. There's a Hayoim Yoim entry which says this, which records the following tension. A guy comes to the Alter Rebbe in Yechidus, and he says, he's telling him that he hasn't got this, and he hasn't got that, and he needs this, and he needs that, and they've got no more money, and they've got this, and they're in trouble with their children, and his wife's not well, and he goes through this litany nebach of terrible problems that he's got. And he asks, and he says to the Rebbe, we need a bracha for this, we need a bracha for that, we need a bracha for the third thing. And the Alter Rebbe says to him, I hear all the time what you need, but I don't hear what you're needed for. What are you needed for? You have to understand this. This is so important as a cornerstone for everything that we're going to be learning about Rosh Hashanah here. There is a fundamental disconnect here. Are you going to live your life? Am I going to live my life? Don't we all live our lives focused on what we need? And how much of our lives do we spend on considering what we're needed for? Now, there is some of it naturally. For example, you have children. You recognize that you're needed for them. You have a wife. Let's say you've got a good marriage. You understand that you've got to be there for her in certain ways. But the main focus of most people, even if they are noble enough to have this feeling of being needed for other people, some moments of their life, what percentage of their life is it? It's a tiny, tiny percentage. And that's not the jackpot. That's not the Jewish jackpot. The Jewish jackpot is understanding that we are needed rather than need. We are needed to make a dira b'tachtoinim, the dwelling place for Hashem in physicality. We are needed to have a relationship with our God. We are needed to learn Torah. We are needed to do mitzvahs. We are needed for that. That's why we were born. And this is a massive, massive consciousness shift, because it's all very well to be learning together the Rebbe's Torah, and it impacts on. I mean, you've got to be without any heart or soul for it not to impact on you at some point. But what happens when you go in the street? What happens when I wake up tomorrow morning and go to the office and I've got 3 calls waiting and each one wants to complain about something else? You know, you're torn away from that into the perspective of what you need. So when Ailey says to her, I'm hearing too much of what you need, he's talking Torah to her. He's a Rebbe. He gets it. He is saying that you are expressing your needs, and I get it, that they're very important, they're fundamental, but notwithstanding that they're fundamental and that you've got to be able to adjust those needs to understand that you've got to adjust them to understand what you're needed for. And you're not doing that. That's what he's trying to tell her. You've got to have bittul. Bittul means self-nullification. We haven't got time to define bittul properly at the moment, but it's a level of humility. You know, we learn with Rabbi Leder in the mornings, and he tells the story of this rabbi who says that from now on he's going to do without such and such because he can do without it. And so the husband here says, you know what, if you're going to do that, I'm going to do without it too. I'm going to be humble as well. And then the president overhears that and he says, you know what, me too, I'm going to be humble as well. And the shamash who's cleaning up says, oh, I'm going to be humble as well. And the president turns to the husband and says, he's going to be humble? We're humble, but him? How's he allowed to be humble with us? Meaning that people put them instinctively put themselves on a pedestal. They don't want to allow that. They don't want to allow the guard of their ego to drop. And at the end of the day, they're looking after number one. And looking after number one has nothing to do with Kedusha. Kedusha is about not looking after number one. Kedusha is about making adjustments to looking after number one. And that's what Ailey was trying to teach Hannah, in the mistaken belief that, sure, she's a frum woman, and sure, she needs children, so she's davening for children. That's beautiful. But how long can you daven for yourself? What are you doing for other people? So what's her answer to Ailey? Her answer to Ailey is, I'm not drunk. You got it wrong. It's true that I'm davening for my needs, and it's true that my need is to have a child, but you don't understand. I'm davening for what I can do with that child. I'm going to make that child into a holy Eved, holy servant of Hashem, that is going to serve Hashem from the day he's born till the day he dies, and 24 hours a day, all the time. Now, let's go back a step. When you say that you're there for other people sometimes, let's take the example of kids. I want to give you an example from the religious community, because, and I hope, God forbid, that people who listen to this year don't think that I'm bagging Jews and being critical. I'm just trying to isolate some sensations and feelings that we all have. You know, you get people, deeply sincere, good people, who, for example, want to be frum and brought up frum, and they're brought up frum. They go to yeshiva. She goes to seminary. They learn properly. They get married. They live very proper, decent lives. She covers her hair. She wears smears clothing. He goes to shul 3 times a day, learns Torah, does it, and they have children. And so they want their children to be frum. So they bring them up with no TV, a certain method of dress, a certain method of behavior, and that's beautiful, right? And now then you get, if you really want to put the searchlight on their soul and go to this question of bittul and ask this question: who are you doing it for? Are you doing that for your children and their benefit, or are you doing that for you because with your friends it looks very bad if your son suddenly starts shaving? Son starts shaving, or he takes off his yarmulke. What are you talking about? He's a frum kid. How can you take off your yarmulke? Or he's seen at the pictures on Saturday afternoon, Shabbos. Now, I understand that a parent who's bringing a child up to be frum, our children are frum, Baruch Hashem, bli ain hara. I would be horrified if they weren't frum. But I hope that I've learned enough of the Rebbe's Torah to understand that nobody's the same. Not everybody is the same. Not everybody can be the same. And if people can't wear uniforms, the Rebbe didn't want people to wear uniforms. You have to be able to make an adjustment to what each person needs. And you as a parent are needed to your children, not what you need. The fact that you want your friends to think that your children are terrifically frum good children, who cares that that's what you want? What about the child? What about the trauma the child has if he's got parents that are rejecting him because he's wearing the wrong colored yarmulke? So that's a moshul of what this tension is, that who are you doing it for? Eli is asking Hannah, what you're davening. I see that you really mean it. I see that you're crying and you're pouring out your heart, but who are you doing it for? You're doing it for you? And that's drunk. That's what it means to be drunk. It means that you're insensitive to the real purpose of what's going on at the moment. And she says, absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. I'm not doing that at all. I'm davening for a child that I can make into a servant of Hashem 24 hours a day. I want to be able to. You're talking about a dira b'taktoinim. What does it mean, a dira b'taktoinim, a dwelling place in the lowest of all worlds? It means to bring a manifestation of godliness into physicality. That's what I want. I want to be a conduit, a pipeline for Hashem into Gashmias. That's what I'm davening for. So don't say I'm drunk. Don't say that I'm doing it because of me. I'm not doing it because of me. I'm doing it because I am a partner in creation, in the sense that I am bringing godliness into physicality. That's what I'm davening for, that I be able to have the power to do that. And in case you haven't twigged to it yet, that is the real perspective you and I have to have on Rosh Hashanah. The real perspective that we have on Rosh Hashanah, is, I mean, there's all the things that go with it. You go to shul and you get dressed up and you put on a tallis and you talk to your friends and you slap each other on the back and it's lovely. That's an important part of life. But when you stand there Rosh Hashanah, it has to be with a perspective. It doesn't have to be, but if you want to have value out of Rosh Hashanah, real value, it is to have this perspective, that the perspective isn't what I need, but what I'm needed for. So, l'chaim. Let's make it harder. Make it harder. You know what, the whole davening on Rosh Hashanah doesn't mention what we've been talking about at all. It doesn't even mention your needs. It's all about crowning God to be king. The whole davening is about Melech, all the time about crowning God your king. So I want to ask you a question. If we go to shul to blow shofar, to commemorate what Adam Rishon did when he brought the animals to be subservient to the king, and that's why we blow shofar and appoint Hashem as our king for the next year. If we're doing that, how can we be asking for things? Have you ever asked yourself that question? How can we be asking? We have a prayer in the Son of Toikef, right? Where we say, people cry in the Son of Toikef. It's a serious thing. Who's going to live? Who's going to die? So by thirst, some by fire, some by strangulation. And we say, spare us all this, God. We want a life of money, health, nachas from our children. You know, if we don't really know what a king is today. I mean, with all due respect, King, whatever his name is, Charles.
He's a Charlie.
He's no king. So it's hard to use king as a moshel. But if you can imagine the Rebbe, and you imagine that the Rebbe asked people. I can't imagine this, but if the Rebbe asked people to sign up for some project, and in which he would be the president of that project or the boss of that project, can you imagine that you would go to him and as you're signing up and you're saying, "I'm signing up, but I need my car fixed. Do you mind helping me fix my car?" That's not the moment to be asking to fix your car. At the moment you're signing up to be to subscribe, to put your Rebbe in charge of this. So when we are crowning God on Rosh Hashanah, and that the whole davening is about crowning God, what does it mean that we're also asking for our needs? How do those two things go together? So the Rebbe takes this a level deeper. What we were saying before is exactly necessary to understand. This is the dialogue between Eli and Hannah, and whether she's doing it for herself or whether she's doing it for what she's needed for. That dialogue is in place and exists. But now the question is, why is there a level of selfish need? And is that something that should be alien to your thoughts on Rosh Hashanah? Should you be beating yourself up for that? Or should you try and understand it in some way? And the Rebbe says, there's no beating up. It's necessary. And it goes together with crowning God our King, and you have to understand why. And what he explains is that there are two levels to this. Remember, we started off with there's a physical level to one's life and there's a spiritual level to one's life. So at the physical level to one's life, we recognize that we need certain things. Hanefesh HaBahamis needs certain things. You need a certain amount of money. You need a house to live in. You need food to eat. You need those things. But we're entitled to ask for those things, and even though when we're asking for those things, we have got to have this concept of what we're needed for rather than what we need. How do the two things marry up? The Rebbe explains an unbelievably deep thing. He explains that we learn in Chassidus and Kabbalah that in every bit of physicality in the world, there are godly sparks. There are godly sparks in all Gashmias, and our job is to elevate those godly sparks. So let me give you a really crude example. It's not really crude because it's one the Rebbeim use. You want to eat an apple. You want the sweet taste of it. You're hungry and you want to eat it. And there's a beautiful apple and it's sweet. And you want to eat that apple. Why do you want to eat that apple? Because you don't know it. You only know that you're hungry. But there is a spark of godliness in that apple that only you can elevate. Only you. That's why the apple's in your house. That's why the apple's in your kitchen. That's why you're thinking of the apple at the moment. Whether you eat the apple or you don't eat the apple, that's a whole different thing. But the reality is that, and that's your life and my life. When you meet somebody in the street, you meet that person because there's a spark of godliness that needs to be elevated. Only you can do it. Otherwise, somebody else would meet that person in the street. Hashgacha Pratis means that everything that's happening to you is happening to you divinely orchestrated in order to give you and me the opportunity to elevate Gashmias into Ruchnias and bring Ruchnias back down into Gashmias. That's the only reason we experience it. That's why we experience it. You think that it's random happenstance. You think that it's that you get up in the morning and you bump your way through the day and you go to sleep at night and nothing, and maybe nothing did happen. But first of all, a lot did happen because you do a lot unconsciously, subconsciously, and unconsciously. But more than that, as you progress in your learning, and as I progress in my learning, you progress in your learning, you suddenly begin to realize that it's amazing, but such and such happened. And you realize that it could really have only happened because you were involved. So when a Jew wants something, explains the Rebbe, there are two levels to that wanting. There is an animal level to that wanting because you want it. You want it for the same reason that everybody else wants what they want. But then there's a separate level. There's a spiritual level where that thing has sparks of godliness in it that belong to you in terms of your job. And that's why you want it, subconsciously. And therefore, when we daven on Rosh Hashanah for health, house, car, money, no dentist this year, whatever your problems are, you are not davening just selfishly. You're davening to say to God, I want the tools to work with to elevate my life, my family's life, and the world. And I'm asking you to give me access to those things that will elevate humanity and the world. And that's why we appoint God our King, but at the same time we're davening for our needs. But they're not just our needs. They're the needs are the wherewithal to be able to serve this King. Now, do you understand that if that's your real daily perspective, you have a different life altogether? Can I do it any better than you? No. I give the share, and I try and I practice, and I commend you to try and practice, because it does work. You have a different level of life. So does your wife, so do your children, so do the people you meet with. So, let's give each other a bracha that we can do it. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Robert, with a question.
Yeah.